listening to the Cricket Podcast.
I think it was a disgraceful performance, and I think it should never be permitted to happen again.
That is very good.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Cricket Podcast, where we will be reviewing the action from the third T20 between India and England. In a game that mirrored the first match of the series, England romped to victory, batting second and easily chasing down a kind of middling Indian score. But there was a lot of action along the way. I am Jack Cope, and I'll be recapping this game with Ross Legg. How are you doing, Ross Legg?
Oh yeah, being an England fan is a roller coaster. We've crushed them, then been crushed, and now crushed India again. So so it's all good over here. Thanks, mate.
And back on the show for another appearance in like a string of recent appearances, it's Dan Weston. How are you doing, Dan?
Yeah, I am good, Jack. Yeah, really good. Glad to be back on here and looking forward to England winning the next two games to fulfil your 4-1 prediction.
We'll see about that. We'll see about that. Ever since I made that prediction, I made it kind of, to be honest, as a bit of a joke because they both said 3-2 England and I'd been talking down India. So I was like, we can't all go 3-2. And ever since then, it's been a millstone around my neck. I can't sleep properly. I can't do my actual job. I'm just thinking about this 4-1 the whole time. Anyway, Ross, before we move on with the rest of the show, do we have any messages for our listeners?
Yes, you should follow us at The Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And if you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. What are you waiting for? And also tell a friend about it. We get so many messages in, people telling their friends, and everyone loving it, and that's what we want. And then if you're following us on the podcast, please make sure you subscribe on there so you don't miss out on any of our good stuff.
Excellent. Now, should we move on to the cricket? Do you want to recap the game for us quickly, Ross?
Yes. So after both teams who won the toss won the game in the first two instances, today was no different. And England from the off had the advantages. Morgan called correctly and chose to bowl. England bowled excellently in the power play, removing Rahul, Rohit and Kishan, limiting India to less than 5 and over. They continued to execute their bowling plans and held India to 86 for 5 after 14.3 overs, which the game was gone by that point, but then stepped forward Virat Kohli, who played his anchor role well, and the game could have been over at this point if he was out 30 from 30, but he had the ability to go up another gear and almost channel his inner A.B. de Villiers, who he's told that he's been phoning for a bit of advice. Imagine having him to text or him to phone, just be like, I'm in a bit of bad form at the moment, A.B., what should I do? And they post 156. Bhuvi then has the ball hooping around, but it's Chahal who provides the opener for India, but they can't capitalise as Buttler is in fine fettle and proceeds to produce an absolute T20 masterclass of his own as England cruise to an 8-wicket victory.
Oh, that's a great recap, Ross. This toss situation, it's all gone a bit PSL in this series, hasn't it? It seems to be so hard batting first and so easy batting second. I do wonder whether anyone will be able to sort of flip the script. Let's not get too sidetracked, though. I think the first thing we sort of need to get into is that Kohli innings. As you said, Ross, he sort of took India from nowhere to a score that was, not par, but gave them a sniff, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it's always difficult, right, in that situation. That when you lose early wickets, it's always going to be... What's the stat that probably will piss off Dan Weston is around... if you lose three wickets in the power play. Yeah, and you win 80% of your games.
There we are.
So whatever it is, whatever the stat is, it definitely annoyed Dan the other day. Lose 3 wickets and you're going to lose 80% of your games. And I think in this case, it showed Virat Kohli's class, which is just unquestionable, right? I think there is a bit where having that ability to go up those gears is not something that, say, Shreyas Iyer has in the locker. Dan, you've obviously looked at Virat through all of his stats recently. What are your thoughts on the great man?
Look, I think that he's probably, no one would debate the fact that he's an elite death hitter. he strikes at 220 plus in the last 4 overs over the last couple of years. So, yeah, those are just simply amazing numbers. And like you say, he's got that in his locker, that acceleration in his locker that maybe a lot of other players don't have, or certainly not to that extent anyway. The problem is it's that middle over approach. We saw it with RCB quite a lot in the last IPL. From memory, I'm pretty sure RCB had the lowest middle overs strike rate in the entire competition last year. And a big chunk of that was down to Kohli's approach. And the problem is that it's all well and good when you go run a ball for the first 30 balls and then explode at the death and end up hitting it, was it 77 or 46 or something like that? Yeah. That's all well and good. But what happens if you get out when you're 30 off 30 balls? Then India probably get 120 and it just puts you in a really bad position. So I'm not a massive fan of these like run a ball or 110 strike rates when you're facing over 20 to 30 balls kind of thing. Because, like I say, if you get out, then it's curtains for your team pretty much because you wasted, like, say, 25% of your team's resources for not a lot of return. So just I prefer the earlier acceleration and yeah, I'm a bit unconvinced about the method. Obviously, it looked good for him today, but whether that's a long-term sustainable thing, I'm not really quite sure.
I think that Kohli would probably argue that in his case, it might be, and we've talked about this a few times, and I think people out there, they think that we don't like Kohli very much, but I don't think that's really the point that we're trying to make. What we're saying is that his style is maybe not optimum for all the reasons Dan said. You do maybe, though, want a Kohli in your 11, though. And if you're going to have a Kohli in your 11, you might as well have, like, the original Kohli. No?
Yeah, there's no point kind of sitting there going, oh, we're going to just have someone who has ones and twos. Like, like today, I thought India's selection was all over the place. Last game, I thought they were so close to getting it. It was like they'd listened to this podcast after the first one, and they'd gone, "Oh my god, these guys have the right idea here," and then they smash England to bits in the second game. And then today, it just seems again confused, and the only way they were going to win was one of their elite players playing an elite innings, and ultimately, India were nowhere near beating England today. That was England cruised that.
Yeah, just before we get on to some of the other reasons, because I do think, like, I actually thought this was the best I've seen Kohli play for ages. Yeah. And I take everything that Dan said about the criticism about him not really going anywhere early. I sort of understand that, although India were 3 wickets down for nothing. So traditionally speaking, you might say that he needed to do a bit of rebuilding. I mean, again, Dan, I reckon you probably dispute that, but there are people who would say, when you're 20 for 3, you don't take a risk to be 20 for 4, especially if you're the key to the whole game, maybe. With these sort of innings, and like, without talking too much about the process, about how he got there, just looking at the results. If you look at those results, and I messaged you about this, Dan, I sort of asked, like, what do players who face 45 balls in T20s sort of normally get? And Dan did some research for me because I didn't know how to do it. And he came back with 46 balls. You'd normally expect an international class batter to have ended up with a score of about 70 in those circumstances, batting first in the last couple of years. So Kohli, he outperforms that, which I think is like one good indicator. And the other thing to consider when you look at whether an innings was good, at the result of an innings anyway, is how did the rest of the team perform? And in this situation, in those conditions, it's pretty clear that Kohli was, to use the cliche, playing on a different wicket, basically. He scored, what did he score? He scored 77. The rest of the team scored 70 of 74. So, for once, I'm going to turn the hairdryer of Indian disappointment away from Virat Kohli, because I think he kind of did his job in the circumstances and, like maybe took a risk eating up a few balls early, but he got there in the end. I'm going to turn it towards the rest of the Indian batters who weren't very good, were they, Ross?
No, not at all. And I'm really hoping, Dan, you've got something about to back up my statement here. Since watching KL Rahul play in the IPL, I've called him the ball eater, and I've had a load of stick recently in the YouTube comments and on Twitter that IPL is the orange cap holder and for the IPL, and he's absolutely brilliant. My thinking on that matter is that KL Rahul's strike rate wasn't actually that good in the IPL, and I think IPL has a bit of an extra weighting than a lot of T20 international cricket actually does. I think a great innings in the IPL should count more than India going and playing against the Australian B team or something along those lines. Dan, am I talking absolute nonsense there, or is there something there?
No, I think you're spot on, actually, Ross. Yeah, the IPL is a really, really high standard, obviously with 4 overseas players per team and those 4 overseas players generally being really good as well. And I think the vast majority of the better IPL teams would blitz most international teams in T20 internationals, and we kind of saw that debate after the first game where a lot of people kind of said, "Oh, Mumbai would beat India," and that's probably true. Like in terms of if they played 50 matches against each other, Mumbai probably would win more matches. But yeah, I would weight the IPL really highly in terms of. And I do in my models and stuff. I do that. I rate that league very, very highly in terms of performance. So if a player's performing well in the IPL, then there's a very, very high chance that they're going to be able to translate that to success in international cricket. But conversely, the other way around, if they're performing badly in the IPL, that's not a good thing either. And that has to be taken into account with international selection, I think.
And so for KL Rahul then, so the IPL, having the orange cap is a great honour. It's something that will go down in the annals of history as hitting the most runs in the IPL. But doing it at a strike rate of 130, 135, I think it was last year, where Kings 11 Punjab didn't even make the playoffs. I think you can't bandy it round. Like if you get relegated in a football season, you're the top scorer. No one still gives a shit about Andy Johnson for Crystal Palace, do they? Like it makes no difference. And the bit for me here was, why did India decide to change a winning formula? Like I could understand bringing in Rohit Sharma, but surely the change was for Shreyas Iyer, and you move things around. Ishan Kishan at the top of the order scared England last time, hit a 50. And they demote him. Where's the logic?
Yeah, though there isn't a great deal, to be honest with you. I mean, poor Surya Kumar Yadav didn't face a ball on his debut and got dropped. You're absolutely spot on again, I think, Ross, because we've got this situation where India, if they were a football team, they'd be playing 4 defensive midfielders, and then their manager after the game would be saying to them, well, "Why didn't you create any chances?" Like it's you can't play fairly defensive minded players, guys who have like 15-16% boundaries, and then go and ask, okay, well, you're playing England and England have got really good batters and I need you to go and hit 200, because it's just not going to happen. They don't have that in their locker. That's not their skill set. We see with Rohit, as he's got older, his non-boundary strike rate has dropped off quite a lot. So he's a worse rotator than he used to be. Even though he did really well in a test series, I've got misgivings about him at the top level of T20 cricket. Iyer, as you say, he's not really an attacking batsman. He's not noted for high strike rate innings at all. Kohli is the best anchor out of the entire lot, and probably, I think most people would say, probably the best anchor in the world. There's just, it's not enough attacking intent. Obviously, KL Rahul again is becoming a more defensive batsman. And you mentioned about the orange cap as well. I mean, that's something that I hate is rewarding the highest run scorer in a match. That's just like rewarding the player who does the most passes in the Premier League, but 90% of them are sideways. Like it's for me, you should have the cap should be for the player with the highest strike rate once they've faced 100 balls. Mm-hmm. That would be much more deserving in terms of contributing to a team's chances of winning matches and therefore the tournament, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So just to nail something down then, because while we're on the India selection point, what is a good Indian top 6 then? Because I've got down maybe Ishan Kishan, Sharma, Kohli, Sky, Punt, Hardik, and then Washington Sundar or Thakur as your number 7. Is that where they need to be heading? Because we've talked about this on every single one of these T20 podcasts. We've talked about where India have gone wrong. Is that what they should be doing?
I think so. I mean, you can go for the Mumbai template, and it's amazing that Mumbai have this template. It's so obvious, but then no one wants to copy it because they're scared. And like you have like this Kohli, you have Kohli as the anchor player for India, and then that's absolutely fine. Personally, I'd open him, but because he's got that lower strike rate against spin in the middle overs, so opening him gives them that better chance to attack more from the start. But yeah, Kohli and 6 hitters basically would be perfect. I think your point about putting Hardik at 6, I think is a really good one, because he's too good as a hitter to be wasted at 7. Like, I can't remember the exact numbers, but like number 7 faces like something like 7 balls or 8 balls in a T20. His impact needs to be more than that. And
well, I mean, today India had a batting collapse and he only faced 15 balls. And I think if we loop back to sort of why this selection, what this manifests itself as, even in a scenario where India kind of collapsed, they still managed to end up with 2 anchors batting together with each other for quite a long time, using up a lot of balls and not going anywhere, which meant that Hardik only faced 15 balls. Washington Sundar didn't bat. Thakur didn't bat. And these are guys, the point of having those two, the last two in your team, is to give you a little bit more batting depth, surely, because they're not necessarily the best bowlers. And if you were going to pick 5 specialist bowlers, I don't know if those two would be in India's side. So what's the plus value? It's that it means you can go a little bit harder earlier and you don't get beached on 150 and chased down easily. No?
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, and Dan, do you think there's a bit of sentimentalness in that India kind of, because like KL Rahul and Rohit Sharma have batted well for India in the past, and is there just a thing now where they're kind of holding on to those past glories, and that 2018 win was amazing, we should continue that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably very, very true. I actually wrote an article today which looks at performance versus reputation, and the results are like chalk and cheese. The players with high reputation don't always have good recent output. And by recent, I'm talking like last 2-3 years, which is still a decent sample size of data in terms of balls faced. But, you know, looking at Rohit now, he's in his mid to late 30s. You can't look at 2017 or 2018 data have that much value on a player who's getting to the latter stages of his career, and that's a very dangerous proposition in terms of selection, I think. But you can't be seduced by what someone done 3 years ago. That's just absurd, and you have to weight that about what they're doing recently. And for me, I think it's a real shame that Ishan Kishan, Suryakumar Yadav, Sanju Samson, etc., Rishabh Pant until recently as well, haven't had that much international exposure, because these guys are clearly extremely talented and have a lot more upside, I think, than a lot of the players that have been picked over the last couple of years for India.
Right, fellas, I think we've done India there. We won't draw a line under them completely. They'll come back in. But we maybe one of the potential turning points that didn't turn out to be a turning point, as it transpired, was that England did maybe let India slip off the hook in terms of their bowling performance. So India, I don't know what they were going on. They were on 120 with 5 overs left, or well, they were. Yeah, bang with this. Ross, explain.
Yeah. So England had bowled really nicely. I thought they would stick into their plans. They reverted back to Rashid opening up, and Mark Wood kind of changes it a little bit. And they limited India to 62 for 3 off of 11 overs, and obviously they ended up on 156. So that is they let the death bowling it went out the window for England. It seemed to me there was a bit of almost a one-dimensional plan. When India smashed England 2 days ago, we said that actually the bowling strategy looked a little bit confused. When Mark Wood plays, they've kind of got a clear vision on how they want to structure that bowling innings. But when the short ball stopped working because Kohli just decided to go up another gear and Pandya kind of took it on as well, it kind of fell apart a little bit. Dan, in terms of England's approach to death bowling, I think the reputation bit comes into this area as well. And I think the stuff that we were talking about in terms of, KL Rahul was great 3 years ago, I think also works for England. And I'm not convinced that Chris Jordan is the greatest death bowler of all time, as Ian Ward on the Sky commentary will have you believe. And like Tom Curran was a really confused selection to bowl at the death, supposedly, or in the middle overs in the last T20. Is that about right?
Yeah, again, I think you're spot on, Ross. England's death bowling issues are just completely selection based, in my opinion. They just don't pick the players in that phase who are the best suited to bowling in that phase. Like if you look at the domestic player pool, it's complete. If you ranked the current players amongst the domestic players, you wouldn't pick them if they were called player 1 or player 2 rather than Tom Curran or Chris Jordan or whatever. You wouldn't pick them. It's a name thing. It's the fact they play, I think, multi formats. I think is a in terms of multi white ball formats. I mean, is a factor as well. But I mean, I've just been cobbling together some numbers about players' data at the death in the England squad and the England setup right now. Okay, so I look at anyone who has an economy of below 9 in the death, and I call the death the last 4 overs, not the last 5, unlike some others, because spinners bowl the 16th a lot, so that's not a death over in my opinion. What I think a death over is like 17, a bowler bowling both 17 and 19 or 18 and 20. The last 4 overs really are the death overs. Mm-hmm. Anyone with an economy below 9, especially if they play IPL, is astoundingly good. Jofra Archer, 8.75. There can be no arguments that Jofra Archer is an elite level death bowler. And, he played up for Rajasthan as well last year, who were a poor team in terms of death bowling, and at Sharjah as well. I mean, those numbers just stand up to every type of scrutiny you could possibly wish for. So Archer's obviously an absolute shoo-in. I'm sure that's no surprise to anyone else in terms of how good he is. He's elite level. But Jordan, almost 10 economy in the last 3 years bowling at the death. Mark Wood, from a small sample size, just over 10. Tom Curran, over 10. Sam Curran, almost 11. Ben Stokes, over 11. This is a common problem for England because they're picking the wrong players to have that in that particular role. The role clarity isn't there, and I think that's because they've got confused selection policies themselves, as you said. There's guys in the domestic game. Topley's sitting on the bench, hasn't played yet. His power play numbers are incredible, and he's going for just over 8 and over at the death. Tymal Mills has got fantastic death bowling numbers, and he also has a really unconventional style, bowls short a lot of the time at death. It's found a style that works for him. Harry Gurney, below 9 at death. Even someone like Matty Potts, who's what I call a 2-2 bowler, 2 power play, 2 death bowler. He's got very, very good phase numbers. There's other players as well. David Payne's very, very underrated. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that England should be calling up these players, but I'm saying if you are saying that the Blast, for example, doesn't have much weighting in terms of England's selection, which obviously some of the selectors clearly are intimating by the fact that they're picking players they're ignoring players who play well in the Blast consistently, then you can't then turn around and say, okay, well, if the Blast doesn't really matter in terms of like, we're just going to ignore players who play really well in it. Well, when these players who play for England play in the Blast, they get smashed around. So you can't work both ways. It's like I've said before, if you're going to take a data-driven approach, you have to be quite consistent with it. You can't say, okay, well, yeah, the data backs up that pick, so that's all good, but I'll go on a hunch with this guy because I quite like him. Mm-hmm. Or it doesn't work like that. You have to have like evidence-based all the way, and I don't think England do that with their death bowling.
I think that might be true to some extent. I'd probably respond on the Chris Jordan point, though, because I think of those you listed. So after, if you think back to the IPL last year, he bowled an over that went for 30. It was the last over of the game, and it went for 30. And following that, Wisden did a collaborative article with CricViz, and they basically went through all the Chris Jordan death over statistics they could find. They compared different leagues he bowled in. So there's a couple of things that came out with Chris Jordan. One, he bowls at the death loads more than everyone else, which means you've got pretty reliable information on him. Two, by their metrics, he's actually about average. He's not really much better than you'd expect, and he's not really much worse than you'd expect. And I think the third point, and this is probably most important, is that I don't know whether there's really, and you sort of, Dan, you just ran through them, apart from Jofra Archer, who is actually genuinely an option for this year's World Cup. So you've talked about the selection conundrum they've developed for themselves by not having a consistent approach. But how are they going to resolve that between now and the World Cup? I think England going in with Chris Jordan as a death bowler for this year's World Cup is acceptable, given that their strength really is batting, and if they're average with the ball, they will win they'll win loads of games. They're by far the best batting side in the world, I think. The final thing I'd probably say on a couple of those England points is I think in international cricket, at least, there is a little bit of an England tax that you have to add on to English bowlers for a couple of reasons. One, when they play at home, they tend to play on small grounds on really good wickets, which mean that they don't take a lot of wickets earlier in the match, which means they're not only bowling on good wickets, but they're bowling on good wickets to guys who can bat. So I think factor that in. Two, England, because everyone knows that England's batting is so good, they don't hold back in the way that they might if they were playing against Bangladesh. And that sounds like a little bit ridiculous, because why wouldn't a batter go crazy at the end? But that is definitely something that comes into consideration, because players cannot afford to leave a couple of runs out there to protect their average or whatever other motivating factor is there. And that must come through on players' economy rates. It's because you're not comparing apples with apples when you look at someone who's bowling death overs for England versus someone who's bowling death overs on like a used wicket in the PSL. Fair enough?
Yeah, the England tax point I think is really, really fair. As you say, domestically as well, that we play on good wickets, often on small boundaries, unless you go to Chester Street, and then the boundaries are huge. But yeah, as a general point, I think that's very, very fair. But I mean, like, if you look at it from that perspective, Jordan's economy of 9.84, and this is not just T20 internationals, this is T20 and T20 internationals, so League T20 as well. That's decent. It's okay. It's, as you say, it's acceptable when you've got a good batting lineup. The point I would contend with a little bit there, Jack, is that bowling teams tend to do better in tournaments than batting teams, and there's the old adage that batters win matches and bowlers win tournaments, and I think that's actually really fair.
Sure, Dan, but here, just to jump in, if we were building an IPL franchise, I'd absolutely agree with you. But England don't have the option here to go and spend 10 crore and bring in Chris Morris. Like they are stuck with the options they have. Now they might not be picking the best option because they don't have a rational selection process, and we've definitely talked about that on this show. But given the selection process they do have and the information we have available to us, I think, taking Chris Jordan as the safest bet is probably the right decision. I don't want to see Tom Curran doing it. I don't want to see Sam Curran doing it. And we definitely don't want to see Stokes doing it.
That's a really valid point. I mean, personally, I would have given Topley and Mills more exposure in recent times. Mills has obviously had those injury problems, both players have had injury problems. I think that's an issue. But Topley's, been a year or so without having major injuries, and he's sat on the bench for the first 3 games of this series as well. Maybe it would have been a good opportunity to see what he could do. But yeah, no, I accept that. The Jordan point, of course, you take him over, the Currans and Stokes as death bowlers. I think that's very, very fair.
Can we move us on quickly? Because I do think we should talk about Jos Buttler. He might not have been the whole difference between the sides, but he was top scorer in the match. After getting a duck in his last game, a bit of a clinic, Ross. Yeah,
I think it was an absolute masterclass. There was a lot of, and rightly so, some adoration for Virat Kohli, but Jos Buttler's innings just put play to what an elite T20 hitter can do. Like, he was 50 from 26 balls. Like in the power play, Jason Roy was struggling. I think we only had 3 off the first over, and we come out of it on the best side 50 for 1, 60 for 1. That is a great position for England to kind of be in, and it just sets up the game in a completely new way and takes the pressure out of it. You know that England are going to be able to find 100 runs within a 15 over period, or 14 over period. I think what is really key to Jos Buttler at the moment is that you kind of look at kind of where his scoring shots are. He is almost impossible to bowl to, and there is a bit now where I think he's really good at the reverse sweep, but what you saw in the innings today was that he was punching down the ground. But when Chahal came on, he was just like, there is no way I'm letting this leg spinner settle, because if he settles and we kind of get under the cosh, it's difficult to come in potentially. He's hit him about 40 rows back, 2 balls in the first over, and you're just like, this guy's absolutely brilliant. Confidence goes up, and all of a sudden he's got a 7-foot stride out or whatever it is, and reverse lapping these guys all over the place. It was brilliant to watch.
Dan, a couple of questions for you. One, where does Butler rank in terms of world T20 batters? And two, obviously he should open the batting for England, yeah?
Yeah, no doubt about that. I just wanted to kind of bring up as well what Dinesh Karthik said. I think he's been absolutely brilliant in the Sky commentary for the first 3 games of this series. And he said that Kohli starts like a Corolla and ends like a Ferrari. Well, I think with Butler, we saw what happens when you start like a Ferrari. that was magnificent. Butler, I think you would say, is pretty fair point to make, that he's in the top 10 T20 batters currently. Whether he's quite, in the AB de Villiers bracket, I'm not 100% convinced, but I think there's a pretty good case for saying maybe he's like top 5 or there or thereabouts. And yeah, much better opener. I prepared some numbers in advance because I thought we might be talking about this. And yeah, I think it's ludicrous really that people are even debating it on TV and stuff like that. Okay, so from 2018 onwards, Butler in the power play strikes at 155 with 33 balls per dismissal, which is just, you don't see those numbers very often.
Yeah.
They're that good. At the death, he strikes at 171 with 12 balls per dismissal. Now, it's a lot easier to replicate that from the other players in the player pool rather than someone who strikes at 155 in the power play at 33 balls per dismissal, which is incredibly difficult to replicate. And so, therefore, for me, Butler should remain as opener, and I think that it should be a done deal, really.
Yeah,
right.
Rajasthan Royals, pay attention.
Right, fellas, we had a few questions in from Twitter. We're up to like the half-hour mark, so keep your answers reasonably short. Sonny, don't you agree India is missing a match-winning bowler in this series? I wonder who he's referring to there, Ross.
Yeah, it's probably Shabazz Nadeem, and I think when you're missing a left-arm spinner like that, it's just absolutely... No, obviously it's Bumrah, and I think Bumrah would make a difference. He is the elite, well, yeah, if not the, top 3, maybe top 1 pace bowler, other than Jofra Archer in T20 cricket. He's obviously going to be missed, but there is a bit around how good your support staff are, right? We just spoke a little bit about kind of Chris Jordan and some of the others in the England team. You don't win with just one bowler. Rajasthan Royals is a great example of that. They can't win with just Jofra Archer alone. I do think if he is added to the lineup, he does improve it. Like Thakur has left a lot to be desired, I think, especially in today's game. But I also think, Jack, your point earlier around how you go down that batting order. So if you don't get to Washington Sundar, you don't get to Thakur as the attacking kind of lower mid-order finishers, then they could change their bowling lineup completely. They'd probably have a better lineup to go with.
Yeah, Dan, how much better are India with Bumrah in this team?
Immeasurably. So you talk about like the fear factor from Ishan Kishan opening. And I think he's the bowling equivalent. Mm-hmm. So he stops teams getting away from the game early on. And then also, Mumbai in particular at the time, they like to hold him back for maybe like 3 out of the last 7. And I think that's a great strategy because sometimes players don't necessarily think, I've got 3 overs of Bumrah to go. They just kind of let the rate get away from them. And of course, they're not going to take him on. And it's very rare that he'll go for like more than about 8 or 9 in an over at the death. Mm. So yeah, I mean, his value to India, I think, is beyond doubt. And he's a considerably better bowler than the options that they've been using of late. In terms of where he ranks, I would have him, Archer, and Shaheen Afridi. I think are up there as the top 3. You can quibble about the order, but certainly they are the elite pace bowlers right now in T20 cricket.
Right, one from Nico Marsh. Why are Milan's slow starts regarded as a huge problem for England when Kohli's equally slow starts are regarded as fine for India? So I think this is probably one about the different strategies the two teams are playing. In the India what they seem to be trying to do is get to 165, 100 to 175 very consistently, and then let their bowlers win the matches, basically. Whereas England are probably thinking if they bat first, they want to put 180, 190 on the board and make it a lot less about what their bowlers are capable of. And obviously, if Milan scores 20 off 20 balls, that's a lot of their resources used up, isn't it, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're putting the pressure on the other players to then hit that 180 or 190. You're asking them to hit at higher strike rates. And I think a lot, even though we're talking about a batter, where there's the debate about the bowling attack as well. We've already discussed the fact that England probably don't have the best bowling attack in the world, and going into the T20 World Cup, I don't think that their bowling attack ranks that highly. So it's kind of more mandatory for England to have players who can score quicker, because they've got to kind of negate their bowling issues, if you like.
I will do one more. This is from Savage Bloke 96, which is a good name, isn't it? Are we going to see, basically this boils down to, are we going to see Rahul Tewatia in one of the last two games? Ross?
Absolutely no chance of him playing. I think he just won't play at all. It's gutting to see.
Well, Tawati's got that kind of dynamic of being a very, very aggressive batsman, but able to contribute with the spin. And I mean, he's a better hitter than Washington Sundar. I don't think there's much doubt about that. I'd like to see him get given an opportunity. And actually, there's another aggressive batsman who's a spinner who hasn't been given an opportunity so far in this series, and that's Moeen Ali for England as well. And I think that, I mean, you look at India's balance and squad at the moment, like Moeen Ali, in my opinion, would walk into India's team as a aggressive batsman who bats in the top six, bowls for matchups. I think that the India's team with Moeen Ali in it would look so much better. So, but there isn't really a Moeen Ali type of player in the player pool of India, so that's really difficult for them.
And that's obviously why CSK spent so much money on him. But there's a bit where we haven't talked about is that bit where Moeen Ali not playing means that England have a bit of flexibility with Stokes and Curran bowling together. I hate watching Ben Stokes bowl in T20 cricket. It is a complete lottery, right? Like, the guy is an unbelievably good cricketer, but when it comes to T20 bowling, I'm just like, why is Morgan trusting him in some of these aspects? And it's not just because England lost with Carlos Brathwaite, remember the name, but like, for me, it just seems like it's a good option to have if you need it, but you shouldn't be the one who's picking up the 7th and 8th over or 7th and 9th over.
Right, fellas, we're going to wrap the show up now. Ross, last chance to give some messages to our listeners.
Yeah, like and subscribe on the buttons on the screen, or follow us or subscribe on your podcast platforms, and obviously find us on Twitter and Instagram at The Cricket Pod. Dan, where can we find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at SA Advantage, and you can check my website out, including the article today that I wrote about Virat Kohli, Ben Stokes, and Manila Gurbaz at www.sportsanalyticsadvantage.com.
We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you very much for watching or listening. We will be back on Thursday with, I think Dan Norcross is joining us, so that'll be good.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me again.